Okay, so hey everybody. Simon, Hledger talk. Who knows what Hledger is? Awesome. Okay. So there is an accounting tool called Hledger, which is written in C++. It's like a command line double entry accounting tool. Hledger is my Haskell port of that. Started in 2007 and been kind of chipping away at it pretty steadily since then, and have had a good number of contributors. They're usually kind of brief, but some significant contributions. Project is at hledger.org, which is not there, is here. And so this kind of gives a little intro. My goal for this talk, and this could go well. If this goes well, we're going to have a very smooth progression from total intro, how to install this thing, and then a few of the things you can do with it, a little bit of a little demo, and then on to how we might make a change to it if we wanted to do some coding, a little bit how a Haskell project looks like, and we'll see how we go with that. And what Craig said was great. Anything that's unclear or confusing at any point, just stop me. I'm in the interest of time, so I don't just talk and talk. I'm going to try and do stuff and show stuff, not just talk. So if you see me just talking and nothing's happening up here, stop me, wave. And if you like and you're able, please do follow along, install code. If you run into trouble doing that, stop me, tell me about it. If we can solve it quickly, that can be useful for other people who may run into similar issues. And it's certainly useful for me. If it's going to be a longer thing, we'll maybe deal with it after the video. So, any questions so far? Cool. So, a little bit about me. I guess I was in need of a time tracking program in 2007. I think I was using Quicken for accounting. I was okay with that, but I was at a new consulting gig where I really needed to track time, and I came across Hledger, used it for about a year, and found it good for that. And then around about the same time I was learning Haskell, this seemed to me to be a good fit. There's kind of a whole backstory there which is described on the site. You can look in the FAQ, which talks about a little bit about the history in there. But the short story is that for a number of reasons, I wanted to see if this app could be written well in Haskell, and it was a great kind of a learning opportunity for me too, because Hledger already had a great design, and I knew I could kind of stick to that, at least in the beginning, and just focus on how do I make this in Haskell, and that worked pretty well. And I've done a few other things now, but this is still my kind of biggest Haskell project so far. It's about 10,000 lines of code, I think, between the CLI. So it starts out as
10,000 lines of Haskell?
Yeah, yeah. I'll double check that in a little bit. So when I started, I thought, well, command line accounting reports, that's going to be really simple, right? It's actually a little trickier than it seemed at first. The original author of Hledger is a very creative guy and has thrown in a lot of features there and a lot of power. But the essence is simple. You have, like it says here, you make a little file. Let's have a look here, actually. So you make a text file and you put in it entries. So this is like a general journal in accounting. And every entry represents a transaction. And this is, a lot of this, keep in your mind, this is programmer's view of accounting. So anything I say about accounting may be a little bit naive, but it's good enough to get a lot of useful day-to-day stuff done. So a lot of us in the Ledger and Hledger community, we're kind of amateur accountants, but we love kind of applying the power of scripting and text and programming to, doing your finances, whether they be simple or a little bit more intricate. So every transaction here is basically a movement of money. Everyone has a date, an optional description, and then usually 2, sometimes more, postings to accounts. So each of these names an account. The account's names may have a couple of parts, like you see here, which creates a hierarchy. So assets is at the top. Yeah?
What is accounting?
Okay, good question.
I sort of know what it is, but I don't really know what it is.
So my answer to that is accounting is it's a system for tracking movements of value, usually money, but could be other things like maybe stocks, could be maybe time, but let's stick with money.
Okay.
And there's a particular system invented in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, I forget, in Europe by an Italian. Kind of came out of the trading culture, the merchants of Venice, and possibly even from India. Somebody here probably knows a lot more about this, but
It was Luca Pacioli.
Luca Pacioli invented a system which we now call double entry accounting, and that's been really the most hugely successful kind of system because it's lasted very much with the same concepts to this day, and it's what businesses around the world use to do accounting. And I guess one of the reasons that it's stuck around is it has this concept of double entry, so there's redundancy built into it, so that it's very good at preventing certain kinds of errors. And so that is built into things like Quicken and QuickBooks, although things like Quicken may hide that a little bit from the user to make it simpler.
When you say double entries, you don't mean that you just write the same thing, like in the same place twice?
In the original paper accounting systems, you would write it in 2 places. So you would have a journal for one account, which was a sheet in a book, perhaps, and you'd make an entry there, a debit they'd call it, or a credit, and then you'd make an equal entry on another page representing another account. So you want to give a little, did I get that right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you weren't writing literally the same, exact line twice. You're writing a representation of the same information, but from 2 different perspectives.
Right.
In different places.
Right. So same number, but it's I guess part of the appeal of this system for a lot of us is that it makes that double entry accounting concept kind of simple for a programmer. In a little bit, this is a little bit of an oversimplification. It loses a little bit of the error checking of true double entry accounting, but basically every transaction is a movement of money from some account to some other account. And normally, if I write it out in full, this will be equal and opposite. So these amounts must always sum to 0 to have a balanced transaction. And basically it's saying money is not created out of thin air, it doesn't vanish. It's got to move from somewhere to somewhere else. And rather than having the 2 ledgers, the 2 pages that have to be, you have to page through, and they used to have scribes to do this. We have it written out in one file, closer together, but still the concept is that there's a movement from and a movement to, and you've got to have 2 accounts. If I write just that, for example, which when you start out kind of makes sense, so I got some money, but the program will reject that because that way lies madness. If we don't record, keep things kind of balanced, we're kind of missing an opportunity for error checking. So this may become a little clearer as we look at some more examples. Did I answer what's accounting? Pretty much, yeah. Okay.
The one thing that I was going to say that I learned is that Pacioli was a colleague of Leonardo da Vinci,
Right.
which is, that was something, when I first heard about that, I thought, wow, this guy is really sharp.
Yeah, he was well connected. And
Yeah.
yeah, there's probably a bunch of great books, but there's one on this that I can show you later on a Twitter feed that I really liked. So the idea is that we take something like this, and quick little demo. We can, Hledger will parse that text format into, here's the same thing, but now it's parsed so it understands that these are transactions. We could look at maybe just the register for the checking account right there, and we'd see just the entries to the bank account, or maybe to all assets. So here's where the hierarchy comes in. So now we're getting checking and also saving and also cash. So these top level categories are pretty important. Accounts, they're also, think of them as categories. They're a way to kind of categorize movements of money. In some programs like Quicken, they actually call them categories. But in true double entry accounting, you don't have categories separate from accounts. You just have accounts, and they correspond both to real world accounts, like a bank account or your wallet. So that's like a place you can store money. But also they're used to represent where money goes to, like an expense, and where it comes from, revenue. So, food, that could be an account, expenses, food. And that way it's kind of a unifying, you just got this one concept, which is great because all this program has to do is keep track of which accounts are which, and you can derive a lot of useful information from that. So, for example, if we wanted to see expenses, food, just one in June. So this is a tiny little file, but when you get a larger body of data, then this can save you a lot of, calculation and manual possibility for error and stuff like that. If we want to see balances, maybe, it'll just add up the each posting in each account. And here you can see the hierarchy coming out. Could also see that in flat mode, where it's just a list. So that's kind of the. Here's another. You might run a command like this, and you might get a little table report like this, which is saying what was the change in any income and expense accounts in each quarter. And so here you can see expenses. This number is actually the sum of the sub-accounts, food and supplies. So in Hledger and Hledger, the accounts the balances accumulate any balances from the sub-accounts, usually, although that's optional. So this is the CLI. We have a little curses mode interface, which I've added, which is based on a great Haskell library called Brick, which is a kind of a console UI construction kit, which is based on another great lib called VTY, which is kind of like a nice, like curses, but nice. And then we've got so we'll look at that in a minute. We've got also a basic web interface. So these are my attempts, especially the web. This is my kind of attempt to see, could I get my wife using this, or could somebody use this who isn't up to using a text editor or doesn't want to use the command line? So I have both the technical interest in this, learning Haskell, and the kind of geek's interest in accounting. But also when I started this, I needed to track time, but I also really needed to track money better. So the tools I was using weren't working. For me, I was pretty frustrated with Quicken, with GNU Cache, with everything I used had issues, and I couldn't really trust the data, because I was in a lot of confusion with money, with accounting. I didn't know my inflows, my outflows. I was getting in debt, and I really needed to be able to trust the reports I was getting, and to I wanted the tool to be kind of somewhat fun for me to use too, so that I would use it consistently. Otherwise, you kind of don't have a hope of staying on top of things. So that's a little bit about the motivation here. Let's maybe have a quick look at these two. So at hledger.org, there's a demo. This is just some junk that folks have added. This is kind of the same information, but more of it at once. So if we wanted to see just checking transactions, you can see that it's also multi-currency, multi-commodity. So it'll track any, whatever currency symbol you write in there, it'll just parse it and track that as a separate commodity. And you can have actually even multiple commodities in the same account as we have here. And then I guess that's a pretty simple. You can add stuff, and there's a little bit of account completion and description completion, that kind of thing. So really simple. This is a Yesod web app. So partly I wanted to see what that was like. It started out as Hapstack, actually, which was an older web framework. Now it's Yesod. And my goal was just to write, part of the desire here was to see, does Haskell make me more efficient? Can I maintain something like this with a economic use of time? Is it possible to kind of, without having a lot of resources to, without a big team, can I maintain it? Yeah.
What's the name of the library used for the web front end?
Yesod, Y-E-S-O-D.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, Yesod, as I call it myself.
Oh, can you say that?
Yesod, Y-E-S-O-D.
The question was what do you use for the front end? Does Yesod actually generate JavaScript, or is it
Oh.
more of a back end?
It doesn't. It doesn't really doesn't constrain what you use for that. This is just jQuery and
Okay.
maybe a little Bootstrap. Yeah. This is so. This is a server-side app. It's not like a client-side app. We have actually a little bit of a beginning on that, but I'm always trying to, since I'm kind of the main developer and this is a spare time project, I'm always trying to focus where it's most useful. So with this, the goal was just to get it where maybe a non-techie could enter stuff, and it would be relatively bug-free and didn't have obvious glitches. So I was trying to keep it a simple, somewhat useful enough to exist, but simple enough that I didn't need to keep fixing things. So that's where that's at right now. More recently, more effort has been going into the curses UI. That's actually the one I use mostly at the moment, and that's getting kind of fun to work on. It's always nice to work on things that are visual, I find. And so if I go into here's the same file, but it's in the UI, and it's just really simple, but just gives you that little extra bit of fluidity. So let's look at a little bit of a bigger example here. This is a kind of a fake journal that's come from another project called Bean Count, which is a Python port of Hledger, and this was. So I've taken Martin's example file here, and we can just load this up in Hledger. Now this, you can see, has a lot of different commodities, and those symbols on the right, these are like stocks and shares and I don't know what. And it's kind of overwhelming my little window here. So I'm going to filter out so I can do match on maybe currency, USD. So let's just see the US dollar transactions. So now we've got a kind of a limited view of the data, which is nice to be able to just kind of slice and dice that way. Now we can see a pretty good looking account hierarchy here. So yeah, I should get back to what I was starting to say. We can kind of reduce the depth limit here so we see less detail. You can see we've got these classic top 5 accounts here. Assets, liabilities, equity, expenses, income. And this is, these are kind of the standard categories in the double entry accounting system. And they have a lot of meaning and some great equations that go with them. And basically, if you organize your transactions this way, it's not required by the program, but as you get more comfortable and get more familiar with these concepts, you'll tend to organize yourself this way, and it can be handy. So now if I just want to see assets, let's add that to the filter. So we're filtering by account name here, and let's open up the detail again. So we've got a checking account, we've got 2 cash accounts, and then if I wanted to see, say, checking transactions, I can just go in there. This is the most recent, and there's more stuff up here. So you can see it's old school. It's a console app, but it's after using the CLI for a long time. This is a nice little change, and it's actually, I find it pretty efficient. If I want to reconcile with my bank account, I'll have the bank's UI open in a web browser, and then I can see the register here, and it's accurate. So when I'm reconciling, I like to be able to see the kind of date by date total, so you can see where you went wrong. Because usually they don't agree. I find I missed something, or maybe I had a typo. So to be able to reconcile day by day is handy. And if it matches to the cent, that makes it easy. So I mean, you could enter your approximate data here. I've found it easier to enter it as accurately as I can, just because then I know when it matches, then I know it's right. So you can get a little over obsessive with this stuff, but that's part of the fun. So, and then I guess one more screen here, you can look at actual transactions. So there's a big one. I guess that's a payroll, and then he's recording all of the details of taxes and insurance and that kind of thing. And you can see performance is not bad for Curse's app. I was kind of hoping it would be snappy, and it's not bad. It's actually limited more here by the keyboard repeat rate than the screen rate. And we've also got, since this is OS X, oh, now I just did a reset. Let's just get that filter back. Maybe let's do a little regular expression here. Let's get the dollars and the gold and the VA, char, whatever that is, and the V, let's get all the V's. So now you can see I've got some more stuff, gold and commissions. And you can see these things with the @ sign, these are prices. So it has some kind of basic price tracking where you can record market prices and purchase prices, and you can get a report to show your current market value of things. And there's 2 big alternatives in other languages. So there's Hledger is the original in C++. Hledger was the second, and it's probably the second most popular in Haskell. And the third big one is bean count in Python. And each of them has their areas of focus and strength. The other 2 have more features right now in terms of price tracking and reporting capital gains and stuff like that. We're catching up.
So can I?
Yeah.
Just basic question?
Yeah.
So if I read it right, the minus 1506, is that something you paid to, I guess, to E-Trade? Is that what that means?
Let's see here. This is more complicated than I would usually do. These are comments. So these here are the actual amounts. And now this with 2 prices, I don't understand. So I'm going to look at a simpler one. Do you know?
Was it like buy and sell? It's usually one's a little bit higher than.
I would not assume that. This is a more normal one. So here he's saying that 16 units of gold, maybe ounces, are bought at $94.18 each. So this is a unit price. So he's just recording as a comment here that I guess 16 times 9418 is 1506, hopefully. So we could drill into that with the command line tool a little better. And we don't have a lot of price functionality in the UI tool yet. Did that kind of make sense?
What's disturbing me is the minus sign. It flips from one
Oh,
side to the other end.
very good
It's
question.
minus here, and then when you showed that other view, it was positive, and it was the same number.
Very good question. So in traditional double entry accounting, there's a concept of debit and credit, which is denoting the direction of flow, basically. And one of the simplifications that the author of Hledger made was, because that trips up everybody learning accounting, he just went with plus and minus instead. So to programmers, that makes sense. I think that loses a little bit of error checking, but it's such a great simplification that most people take to it pretty quickly. So basically, money, like a positive amount, is increasing the balance of that account, and this negative is I think of it as money being added to this account and being taken away from this account. So you're paying cash in order to receive gold and commission. Oh no, you are, what are we doing? Buying shares of gold. That's where the description comes in helpful sometimes. So we are giving away some cash. So that's decreasing our cash balance. We are increasing our gold balance. And we are also increasing the amount that we have spent on commissions. So expenses, when you spend, tend to increase. You'll see if we have a liability or an income here. It's not a good example, I don't get that. Well, let's find the liability. So you can see that tends to be negative, so a debt. So basically, if I have a credit card balance with this program, you get to know that it's going to be red, it's going to be negative, bad, you know. On the other hand, interestingly, your income accounts will also be negative, and that's actually good if you like income. So it's a little bit of a quick adjustment when you start with these tools, but and we may add the option to display in debit and credit for more traditional reports if that ever becomes, you know, priority. Yeah.
I saw earlier you're converting USDs to gold.
Yeah.
So is that represented with types? You know, is that type checked and things like that? Like,
It is not. We don't use the Haskell type system for that.
Okay.
We have an ADT, so an abstract data type that, or algebraic data type that, which I'll show you in a minute. So maybe we'll. Let me see. How are we doing with my great plan? Meetup. Yeah, we'll install Hledger. So I've been talking about it for, I guess, 40 minutes. Told you that would happen.
I'm just curious if the curses interface is responsive to the mouse.
I was just going to say, good question. Since I'm using the Apple terminal here, which has some mouse support, we can scroll up and down, which is kind of nice. And if you happen to have a slower key repeat rate, rather than adjust it, you can use this, which is handy. We don't have click support yet, but the author of VTY, I think, just added that to the underlying, or maybe the brick author added it to the VTY lib, so we could add maybe mouse click support, that kind of thing. We've also got, you know, VI keys for those who like that. We've just added, or I've just added basic editor integration here. So the command line tool is strictly read-only, partly for simplicity, partly as a way to just to reassure you that it's, you know, your data is kind of immutable when you're reporting. So reporting and editing are separate phases. Oh, what did I do? I hit A. Okay, demo. So if you wanted to add a transaction, there is a little sort of interactive wizard where you would, you know, got a little completion. You can enter a date, maybe yesterday, and you could say maybe what are some descriptions? Food, anything built in. I don't know what's in this file, but let's say we went to restaurant. Okay, so it looked in the history, it found something it thought might be a little similar. It's going by the description here. I don't see how that's similar. I'm going to restart that. Let's say we were doing taxes. Oh, this is date, okay. So this is another kind of facility for the non-text editor user. If somebody wants to be kind of guided through a little basic data entry, that's what this is for. So maybe it might be like that transaction. It's going to use that for defaults. So it's going to ask us for each posting one by one. So I'm just going to accept this one. Maybe it's a different amount. Let's say it was $600. And this one was, $100. And we'll just accept the defaults for that. You see it shows the balancing amount so that they'll add up to 0. And then we could add more here, but we're going to enter dot to finish. That's what it's going to save to the journal. And it'll ask me if I want to do more, but I'm just going to stick with that one. And now we're back in the UI, and it's added that, so these numbers have been updated. I don't know what I just added, so one of those numbers is different. We also now have, if you hit Shift-E, you can jump to your editor, which might be, if it happens to be VI or Emacs, it will jump to the right place in the file to edit that transaction that you were currently on, although I wasn't actually on a transaction here, so let's go into a transaction. So if I did edit on this, it'll jump into the journal file at the right place. You could make that change. VI, how do you work? Let's see one. And now if I don't fix that one, so that doesn't balance, I try and save it, now it's giving me an error, could not balance, and it should tell me, it gives me a little information. So if I reload, it's still not going to like it. I could go to an editor and fix it and then reload, but let's just use the inline edit again, so E, and did we get it right? Oh, we're not in the right place. No, it's put me at the bottom. Okay, so it didn't work in that case, so I need to fix that. So I want to get to 170.38. Let's search for that. Let's fix it. Okay, so now it's happy, except I need to hit G one more time, refresh. Okay. So that's the UI. Do you guys know about Stack, the installation tool?
About it.
Some of you? Yeah. So major digression. Cabal is the kind of default packaging system that Haskell uses. Haskell packages are defined in the format provided by Cabal, and then they're uploaded to Hackage, which is a great big repository of packages. Cabal provides an installer tool, this one. It's known as Cabal install to be precise, but frequently just shortened to Cabal. And you can install Hledger with a command like that, if you're lucky. There's a weakness with Cabal, which is being improved all the time. It's a lot better than it used to be. But Haskell packages tend to be very sensitive to having multiple versions of the same package installed in the one place on your system, because GHC does a lot of cross-module optimization. They're all very interlinked. A couple of reasons. But Cabal historically has been a cause of hair pulling. So some folks now at a company called FP Complete built a kind of an alternate user interface and some additional, an alternate implementation of the Cabal installer using the same underlying Cabal library, which is called Stack. And it's kind of similar in the beginning. So that would also install Hledger. I guess the main big advantage of Stack is that it installs, Cabal looks for an install plan on the fly every time you do an install. So it goes to Hledger and it looks for compatible versions of the thing you've asked for and everything it depends on. And because there's a lot of reuse in Haskell, that could be hundreds of other packages, and they all need to be compatible with each other. So they, each of them will specify a range of versions of its dependencies that it will accept. And Cabal is very good at finding those compatible install plans, but it's not always repeatable because that can change day to day depending on what's been uploaded to Hledger today, and also depending on what you have installed in your local system. And especially if you keep installing over time, you build up more things in your system, it gets harder to find an install plan. Cabal introduced the concept of a sandbox, which is where you have an isolated package database. Stack takes that farther. It automates the sandbox, so it's always using a sandbox. And it installs from a known compatible snapshot of a large selection of packages. So it's a little bit like if you're familiar with Linux distros like Debian, they have, I guess, what is it? They have a pool of packages, which is the experimental distribution, and whatever's installed there is immediately available, but it might not work together. And then the maintainers kind of freeze that into progressively more stable snapshots, the unstable distribution, the testing, the stable. So Stack has a set of snapshots called Stackage, which is stackage.org. And it also does some other cool stuff, like it will install GHC for you, including on Windows. And there's a number of things like that which really make a big difference to the beginner. And that's partly why that aforementioned new website recently appeared. And this is a really hot topic right now, pretty controversial. I think hopefully that will get resolved in due course. But one of the big reasons for this site was that fans of Stack wanted the Getting Started page to really focus on Stack and give you, one simple path to getting started. And whereas the existing site is a little bit more democratic and confusing. So that's a little bit about the background. So if you want to install Hledger, so let's do that. You go there, you go to the download page. If you're okay with a slightly out-of-date version, you could use one of these methods. So apt install Hledger should work on Debian, or brew install should work on Mac, but those won't necessarily get you the UI and the web interface. It depends if they've been packaged. So typically I'll use Stack. And Cabal also works just fine. If you like Cabal, use that. For a couple of years, I spent a lot of time documenting every possible failure mode, which, since this is aimed partly at newcomers, I wanted this to be kind of useful to a lot of people, eventually, someday. Trying to document all of those ways that things could fail was a pain. So this has been a great win for this particular project. So we're going to install Stack. So if I'm on a Mac, I already have it, of course, but I might do brew install Haskell Stack. Already got it, okay. And then, maybe I'm just, in my home directory, I'm just going to do stack install Hledger. That's going to go to Stackage, the current LTS version, which is the long-term support version. And it's going to get whatever version of Hledger is in there, which I guess is probably 0.27. Let's see. Yeah. And standard place it installs that is in home directory /.local/bin, which I guess has some kind of precedent in the Unix world. So it's good to have that in your path. Then everything you install Stack with Stack will just work. And of course, if I wanted the other stuff too, these are also packaged. So let's get those. And there's also this. Hledger API is not packaged yet. Okay, skip that one. Okay, So if you're doing this for the first time, as a first-time Stack user, this could heat up your CPU, could run for 15 minutes or so, because it's installing a lot of stuff. Maybe longer, depending on your machine. But it's something you can walk away from, and it'll basically pretty much work, which is great. You can kind of rely on it being repeatable, which is awesome. So while that's happening, maybe, any questions?
I got all 159 done when you were talking, so.
So the directory, the directory from which you run Stack is very important, I think. Is that right?
If you're just installing stuff as an end user, no. It's just going to use your user database. If you are in Haskell source code in a project, then yes. So as a developer, and we'll do this next maybe, so thanks for bringing that up. Stack is going to use, if you're in a project, like if I'm in the Hledger folder here, let's do this in Emacs. So this is Hledger source. There's a stack.yaml. So this is a config file that you'll see in projects that support Stack usually, and it kind of well, I should show. Each Hledger is made of a couple of packages, Cabal packages, and each one of those has a Cabal file, which is the first way of specifying a package, what's in it, so kind of description, metadata, source files, that kind of thing. And then Stack YAML kind of ties one or more of those together with a little bit more information, like which Stackage snapshot you should pull it from. Here are the packages involved, and then a few extra things that aren't in Stackage. It pulls those from Hackage. And then if Stack sees that, it will create a local sandbox. So this Stack work directory here, that's full of all the magic. And that way, when you install something, when you build a project, it's going to be independent from other projects. So you can jump from one to the other and be free of hassles.
So as long as you have this file in a folder from where you invoke Stack, then it's going to install everything to just that directory in a sandbox.
Right.
If you call Stack, like if you invoke Stack from another directory, it's going to install it globally. Is that right?
It's going to use your project global, yeah.
Okay.
It'll
Global
actually climb the directory tree from where you are, looking
Stack
for.
install will still install in the local bin even from.
That's correct. That's true. Yeah, that's Stack install's purpose actually. So typically, if you're developing, you'll run Stack build, and that just builds it in the local. Yeah,
Okay.
Good clarification. Stack install will move it into your local bin.
There's also another thing you can do with it that Cabal can't do, and you can have multiple projects that then build up to a bigger Stack project, and it just builds all the dependencies all the way up. It's kind of a neat way of managing a project that has a lot of different dependencies
Yeah.
or components.
Yeah. Cabal has a feature like that too, right? The add source, but not as smooth.
It would be newer if it
Okay.
existed.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a great tool. Highly recommended if you're Haskelling. How are we doing with our install here? Nice. Okay. So that's how that should work. Just quickly, let's look at for time tracking. Hledger also supports this time log format. It's got clock in, clock out records. So I can do get little reports on that. What did I do? Oh, okay. It makes them look like transactions basically. So it's time, but it's it's just another commodity. So Hledger doesn't really know anything much about accounting. It knows a little bit more than Hledger does. Hledger explicitly is agnostic. Hledger, I would like to have a little bit more knowledge of accounting, but you can see it's really based a lot on the text that you put in your journal. So you write whatever kind of commodity you want. It doesn't know what an H is. We know it's an R, but it's useful. And then I guess another one is this. I found it a pain for retroactive time logging to have to do clock in, clock out records, even with tools. So this is a little more of an approximate format. Each dot is a quarter hour. Or you can write a number if it's easier. And these are just account names. So these are categories of time expenditure. And so I find that pretty handy. So we could do a little. What did I do? Well, here's a great example of a little bit of troubleshooting. So what is the issue? Line 4, column 1, unexpected F. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Huh, interesting. Oh, because I just installed an old version of Hledger from Stackage, which doesn't support this new format. Great. Way to go. So let's look at maybe installing from the source. So if I wanted to get the development version of Hledger, this is just an alias for the Git repo. So I would do that. Maybe. That's just coming from here, and so now here I would do that stack build, for example. And here's one I prepared earlier, which should be ready to go. Okay, so we'll just reinstall that. Great. So that's just handy for like quick little time reports. Other questions? All clear? Maybe can you guys think of, or can any of you think of a feature we might want to add? There's a lot of docs about the various reports and things you can do. Maybe just quickly we would look at here. So commands basically. So accounts will list your accounts.
I want to balance my comments.
Balance your comments. Let's see, how would
Does it
that,
already do that?
how would that look? Balance. There is a thing, there is a keyword like that which has to be balanced by one row.
So in an example you showed before, to write about the amounts, there was a semicolon and
Oh, right.
comments.
Right. You mean to align them?
Make sure that the numbers inside the comments add up.
Right. Well, numbers actually in comments aren't supposed to have any meaning, so that was purely, for his own information. So I know.
Okay.
Comments are bad here the same reason comments are bad everywhere. They're not checked.
So if you want something to be checked, you wouldn't write it in a comment. Yeah. But I find that it is sometimes, one of the problems with this is, I find myself a little constrained here is that financial data tend to be a little reluctant to share the full details of your own. So I have a lot of great examples here, which I don't want to put out on a video on the internet, which is, it's a real pain getting good examples for this. But I know in my daily use, I will often use little comment. Well, I said often. I will now and then use a comment just if I've written something with a price and I just want to see the total, I might just put it in the journal, just for convenience when I'm reconciling, saves time.
I have a question about stack install.
Yeah.
So stack install Hledger will pull down the source from package, and it will build it, and it will install it locally, right?
Correct.
What if I just want to pull down the source from package?
Then use
There is
Cabal.
a command for that.
Okay.
Cabal install.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Question so I started using Hledger like a couple days ago, and I'm just going
Great.
to the checking account and entering in things that have already happened, and I'm thinking, okay, I can script that. Do you do any of that? Do you make scripting?
Definitely. So that's actually a big issue. Is how do you get data in this without so much manual, especially when you're catching up on past history. So our kind of standard answer at the moment is that you import CSV and you convert that, because at least here in the US, that's the only format you can be kind of guaranteed of getting from your bank. CSV is not a very rich format. It doesn't have the structure that we have in a journal. So we have, we'll get back to these commands maybe, but there's a manual basically for each format. The journal, the CSV manual is the one we want. So this gives a little spiel about this, and there's a tutorial too, where you have a little extra hints file which has these rules, which just tell it which field is which, you know, what format the dates are in, and I guess the big thing is how do you match, how do you assign accounts to your CSV records? Because the bank doesn't know your account system. So let's see, can I show a little bit of common rules? So here's some CSV rules. If the bank CSV transaction has this in it, then I'm going to use these accounts, and I'm going to add this comment. If it has, you know, some of these things, I'm going to use these accounts. So with this and CSV, let's see here. I have an example here actually. So that's a real simple one. So Hledger will read that natively. And if you don't have a rules file set up, it'll just make a dummy one for you. So we should be able to just print that. You can see it's using, it did find one. I guess I already made one, sample.csv.rules. No, yes, in data. So you can see it's just saying this is going to be the default account to use. This is the fields in this order. Here's a couple of little rules to assign the second account. And from that and this, it generates those. And of course we can run the usual commands, balance, accounts. These are all the accounts that are used. If I want to see, you know, the checking register, whatever. Oops. And you know, if you want to see a list of commands, you just run it without any. I think those are the main ones that I covered. Something we might do actually is make an add-on or tweak an add-on. These add-on commands, these are actually any Hledger dash something executable in your path. So Hledger just kind of a little bit like Git. I think Git does something similar. Git has all these add-on commands which are separate executables, and that is that's a convenient kind of escape hatch for Haskell add-ons because we're statically compiled. It's a little harder to have a runtime add-on, so it just invokes separate executables. So I've got a couple of these in the extra subdirectory of Hledger. So let's see, what about, let's see, what does this do? Hledger equity. So this is something copied from Hledger. It's a command that makes a transaction that brings the balances of some accounts to 0, which I find useful at the end of a year. I like to bring all my assets and liabilities to 0, and then because I split the file at a year boundary, not everybody does this, but I like to do this. Then I have a corresponding transaction at the beginning of the new year where I restore those balances. We can get into that more if it's of interest. It's a little bit, but this is basically an add-on which does that, and this is a little too big. Let's see here. This is using Hledger's library aspect. So it's also a Haskell library that you can reuse, and that's what's being used here. So I'm importing Hledger CLI, which is most of the kind of stuff you need for adding a command. This is adding some command line help for this Hledger equity command. This is using the commandargs lib, which is one of the two big libs used for doing command line options in Haskell. And here's our little script. It's just a short main. We get this is a utility provided by the library to get options. Another utility. This is responsible for finding your journal file, parsing it, and then running some command on it. So whatever we have here in this do block is what's going to run. It's going to receive the journal. Let's have a little look actually at some types. So these are the kind of basic core types of Hledger. We've got a journal, which is a list of transactions. Each of them has a couple of postings, maybe some market prices. And then we can also take a journal and calculate what accounts it references and what their balances are. So let's see. So every amount is some decimal number. A lot of this you can ignore right now. Every amount also has a commodity, so here's where we're not using Haskell type system to differentiate commodities. It's just identified by a commodity symbol, which is some text. So if an amount has a USD following it, it's US dollars, or it could be the dollar symbol. If it has a different symbol, then it's considered different commodity. And therefore will not be added together. It will be reported as separate amounts. So there's the amount right there. It can also have a price. And then a posting is, the posting, remember, is a line like this. So it's basically an amount and some amount, what did I say? It's an account and an amount being added to or taken away from that account. So you can see we've got, it actually can have its own date, although you don't usually write that separately. But mainly it's the account and the amount. You can see we've got some other features here like tags and balance assertions is an error checking feature.
Why does it have two dates?
That is basically a holdover from Hledger. So Hledger has this feature where you can have the primary date and you can have what it called an effective date, which is supposed to help you out in the case where maybe you bought something on Saturday but it clears in your bank on Monday. And you might want to report it one way or the other. And I find that has turned out to be unnecessary because you can also give a date to an individual posting, like here. And this is actually a case where I'm going back on what I said about comments. You can actually put some semantic stuff in a comment, which is dates. So I could say here, this actually cleared on 1/3 in the checking. And when I report on checking, the date will show as 1/3. If I report on income, it will show as 1/1. That I find is simpler, and you don't have to remember which kind of report to run. So I like this better. And if I If I could, I would take out the secondary date feature. So just running quickly through the types here. So a transaction then, which is this whole entry here, has the main date and the main description, and then a couple of postings, usually 2, but in some cases fewer and often more. You could have fewer, like this is usually illegal, but if that was 0, it's fine because nothing's unbalanced. There is another escape hatch inherited from Hledger, which is you can have a notation like this this says, don't bother balancing this one. This is special, So if you're starting out and you really can't figure out the double entry, because sometimes like real world transactions, if you're not familiar with double entry accounting, it can be a little hard to know which accounts to use. If you get into like maybe doing loans or maybe sending an invoice, anything that gets a little bit more complicated. It's easy once you know how, but in the beginning, it's nice to be able to have a little escape hatch. Some of the Hledger folks will frown on this because we're also big about correctness, but I think one of the features of these text-based systems is you can kind of start out real simple and get more sophisticated as you learn. And because it's text, you can have it revision controlled, you can go back, fix it up, search and replace. It's great. Unlike when I used to use Quick and GNU Cache, it was a little bit more nail-biting to do mass edits on your historical data or to do any kind of feature that you don't do often, like closing accounts or whatever it may be, because you don't have quite the same visibility. Here, because it's text, you can do a diff, you can look at the version control history. It's great. If you're of a certain mindset, which probably a lot of us here are. And then you've got the journal. So that's the kind of basic collection of transactions. That's a file. And it's got basically the transactions. That's the core of it. And it can actually be more than one file. You can combine files, you can include files, that kind of thing. And for simple reports, like if you're printing transactions, if you're running a register, that's all you need is the journal. If you're doing account balances, you need this one, which goes a step further and aggregates things into accounts. I call it a ledger. You could probably call it something else too. But that was kind of my reading of what a ledger was. It actually summed up things. And here's the account. It's got a name, it's got the balance, which is the sum of the postings to it. And it's got sub-accounts, and that's how you can figure out the hierarchy and that kind of thing. I have been using, I use Emacs mostly, but I've been playing around with IDEs always, because Haskell is a language that can really benefit from that. And has anybody tried IntelliJ or Atom or, yeah, so I've been really liking IntelliJ, and I've been trying to do most of my Hledger hacking in this recently. And I tried Atom. I tried Atom too. Yeah.
Have you tried Haskforce?
Yes.
How is it?
I think right now there's 2 good plugins for IntelliJ. I think Haskforce is one, right? And the other is let's see here, plugins. Browse. Haskforce is one. I think I have it installed but not enabled. I think I have Haskell. Maybe I'm using Haskforce right now. Yeah, so it's good. Yeah, I found the 2 of them about equivalent. Both of them work as well as GHCMod, which is the underlying tool that they use to get information about your source code. And GHCMod is good depending on your project. If you have a multi-package stack project, it doesn't always handle those well. So right now I don't have like really reliable annotations in my source, but it's surprisingly good, and I just don't sweat it because I've burned so many hours trying to get this working in the past. Some of you probably have too.
So what IntelliJ steps are you using?
Say again?
What IntelliJ add-ons are you using?
Yeah, good question. That's what I was just trying to check.
Okay.
Where do I see that? In here, probably. That would be plugins. I guess if I just search here for Haskell, right? Yeah, there it is. So I'm using the IntelliJ Haskell right now. Haskforce is, I found, about equivalent, but you shouldn't have them both enabled at the same time, I guess.
Don't have them both. Okay.
Yeah.
Google it.
Hoogle it does something. I guess you can Hoogle things in your source.
So would you say it's more robust than like Emacs with GHC mod and all that?
No, they're probably about equivalent. Though I'm using Emacs constantly, I've not tooled it up with the very latest Haskell stuff for Emacs, because that's always been a bit complicated. I think now it's actually rather good. There's a few different options. There's Intero, which is the latest from the Stack people. Intero, yeah. You can find that on the new website. GHC Mod has, I think, a couple of plugins for Emacs, and FlyCheck can probably show you some good. So there's some good guides out there at this point, and I just haven't. Some of you probably have a good setup with that. I was just ready to try, because I guess I have been using an IDE for my day contract work, which is PHP, and I've been, much as I love Emacs, it doesn't do everything as well as some IDEs do, you know. So the search in here is fantastic. So sometimes just having a more stable structure of windows. Sometimes you want the flexibility of Emacs, but you know, it's nice to be able to just click this open and see the shape of your project and find stuff. Another tool so let's see, let's open up that, what was that? Hledger equity.hs. And so, have I got any clickability here? Not so much. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but I don't sweat it, you know, because I can easily search for that with journal do, and that's totally going to work. Huh? Not today. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Maybe if I'm in a more of a core module here. Let's see. Journal.hs. Maybe it takes a little time to warm up, not sure. But anybody using GHC ID, really liking that tool. Since I don't have reliable checking here, and also because I don't necessarily want to check just this file, I sometimes want to build a whole project, and because I might have done a refactor that broke some other module. So if I get a little console window open here, GHC ID, which you can stack install or cabal install, and that actually will be just enough if you're in a package directory. So I could go into go into the package directory and run GHCID, and it'll try to run GHCI in whatever way it looks like it's going to work, and it'll use that to get fast type information. What I am doing instead right now is I have this make rule which builds more than just one package. So it builds both the Hledger lib package and the Hledger package, which I like because I want to see anything I broke across the whole. You know, I'm often not working in just one package. You're kind of spanning them. So I'm going to tell GHCID to use that, like this. And now it'll think for a little bit. And basically it just, whenever a file changes, it'll rerun GHCI and it'll show you the errors. And it'll kind of scroll them nicely so they're always visible. And this is great. So I just leave this running. And so even though I don't have little red squiggly lines, I just keep an eye on that. And now, you know, whatever I do here, if I save, it'll that quickly, show me whatever it is, and if I fix it, I think I don't even have to hit Command S here. I think I have some kind of autosave going on.
Command loses focus.
Oh, is that it? Something like that. Okay, I have to save that one, but I didn't have to save that one. Interesting. So trying not to sweat it, because these things take up too much time. And the bottom line is the tooling is just getting better and better, and pretty soon it's going to be, I think, great. It's already pretty great in some ways. Questions, thoughts, comments?
I do have a few questions. You were showing the time tracking. Does the Hledger web have support for time tracking?
Yeah. So all of the Hledger tools, they're using the same underlying library, Hledger lib, which you can see the haddock for over here on Hackage, or in Stackage too. So it's got the basic data types, and then the basic readers, which are basically parsers. So I have notions of adding lots more file formats, but right now these are the three that it supports. So it'll read a CSV or a journal or a time log. And the latest version, there's time dot as well. And then the Hledger package, which is the CLI, the command line tool, you can see that it depends on Hledger lib, and it adds these commands, which are all the commands you can type. And then Hledger web and Hledger UI in turn depend on both of those two. So there's some good reuse. So we have the same, all the same file formats, the same options, as far as possible are reused and shared. And latest thing, which I'm kind of proud of, is we now have proper Unix man pages and web docs developed from the same source. And so here, these correspond to man pages. You can see a little bit of the man format there, but still kind of nice. So some of this web content is kind of filtered out when the man page is built, and vice versa. There's some man stuff which doesn't appear on the website. This is done through Pandoc, which is this magical document processing tool, also written in Haskell. And then finally, you can, this is in the forthcoming release, 0.28, which is due now, as soon as I can do the release notes. You've also got these docs built in, so we have help, or man, or info, which show the manual for that command in one of those formats. So if I want to see, here I do have man pages installed, but say I'm on Windows, I don't have man installed. I could run Hledger man and get some kind of, so you have the full documents, or if you're, an Emacs guy, you might run info. Oh, Hledger actually knows the manuals of all the others, so you might want to look up maybe the journal format and see. Maybe you're not online, you can't get to the website, so you would, you've got the same manual in here, and you've got all the details about, how everything works, and that can be, I think, a useful reference. That's also built into Hledger UI, at least it's getting there. So if I go to any file, doesn't matter. If I hit question mark, got a little help here, and in the bottom you can see I can call up those same things. So here's the man page again. As soon as I quit out of that, I'm back in here. I should add a button to open up the website here too. But this is handy too, just a little quick reference. So sorry, I wanted to show that because I'm all happy about that.
My other question is, does Hledger have any internal support for version control of the transaction log?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I add something with Hledger, it doesn't automatically do a commit for you, which would be probably nice. Yeah.
Is there a place
That would be great. There is a tool, I think it's a package, I think it's FileStore, which has been used in the past by, possibly by Git, the Haskell wiki, where you do an edit to a wiki page and it automatically commits it. I think it might use this package here, FileStore. Yeah, there's the Git author. And this might be a good one to use, because this knows how to talk to Git and Darks and Mercurial, I think, and would be a way to make it VCS agnostic.
I understand that clicking can be delete a transaction quickly if you don't have a history that you would in a standard double entry accounting system. Does Hledger keep a running record so we can see if someone deleted a transaction and be able to see the history of the previous?
Yeah, that's basically where the version control comes in. So we don't yet have automatic commits to the VCS, but let me stand up so I can see you. I'm just trying to see here. Okay. So no, it's up to you to do that manually. So if I'm making edits, I typically won't commit after every single transaction, but I'll do it maybe every day, but I'll do it manually. So what we could do is make that more automatic. Right now, it's up to you how often you commit.
Does that multi-user support so you can see who did what?
Sure, because it's using standard, the version control tools that programmers use to collaborate. We can use those same tools because it's a text file. So I can show you, for example, let's see if I go in here, do git ll -20. Here's the last, my commits of my own journal and time log and stuff like that. So any of those I can review and see exactly what I changed. And or before you commit, it's quite useful. Git will show you what's dirty, what you've changed since last commit. And that's, any of those things is super useful when you get confused, because it can be confusing when you're.
Can you export the data into a QuickBooks or quick and compatible file in your account?
I think we have some tools for that, but it's not yet built in. Mainly just a matter of time and priorities, but what we have right now is CSV export. So anything that can consume that, you can get it out of Hledger and import it via CSV. There is a site that I put together also more recently, plaintextaccounting.org. And this is an attempt to try and cover, because the Ledger community and the Hledger community and the bean count community, they're like super related, talking about all the same things, same philosophy, and yet a little bit siloed because we each have our slightly different file format and different mail list. This is kind of supposed to be a portal for tying those together and kind of sharing some of the common techniques. And I think down here there's some tools about data conversion. So some of these will work with one or the other of the clones. Some of them are kind of agnostic, but you can see there's some Quicken and OFX and GnuCache type tools here, which I haven't tried all of them, but one of them will probably do what you need. So there's also, if you're interested in the kind of general field of this, there's a Twitter hashtag, basically plaintext accounting is the one. This is one, I was tweeting here for about a year, still send the occasional tweet, just sending little tips, which is a fun way to get some random tips and references. And then we have also individual tags for the individual tools. And there's us, famous, cool. So I don't know, how are we doing on time? We haven't gotten into any coding yet, but how's everybody feeling? Have we seen enough? Do we want to change? I mean, this is accounting, so to me, you know, it does get interesting if it's, you know, you're keeping yourself out of debt and you're trying to get your balances up. That makes it more interesting. But can be a little dry if you're not yet in that frame of mind.
This is a fairly large project that you built with Haskell, and there aren't all that many of those. Like, how have you found Haskell's promises to hold in a project like this? Like,
pretty well.
Yeah. So it compiles, it works.
Pretty well. The fact that I've kept it going for 8 years, the Haskell experiment is working out pretty well. So, you know, and I should collect more, like, I'd love to spend more time getting more data points on this, but early on, you know, I had like a minimal subset of Hledger's functionality working, and it was a much smaller number of lines of code to do more or less the same thing. And over time, we've grown. We're still not as large as the C++ code base as you'd expect, but
in terms of
lines of code, yeah. There's a lot of things that it does that we don't yet do. Partly that's by choice, slightly different philosophy about what kind of features to add. There's also a lot of things we do that the others don't yet have, like the UI and the web interfaces. But all through the old "if it compiles, it works" mantra, there's some truth to that. At least if it type checks, you know. I mean, there's been a lot of advantages. One huge one is that I could just start kind of hacking things together without knowing where I was going. And over time, refactor and get clarity. And when the types don't work, I'm forced to clarify my thinking. And you know, things have transformed a lot from the beginnings. And some of the early way that things are organized, you know, there've been large-scale refactorings. We've recently gone from string to text to try and improve our memory footprint and stuff like that, which wasn't a priority earlier, but now it was a big undertaking, but because of types, you know, it's fine. Even though I don't yet have the tools that would just make it happen. I'm wanting that tool where you just press a button, but Haskell's been really good for that. It's been really good for cross-platform deployment. So I had a goal of making this available on Mac and on Windows, and that's been fine. I've had to be a little selective about which libraries to use, but so one example is that UI is not supported on Windows yet because there isn't a good curses lib for Windows, unless you're an expert at installing C libs and stuff. So I could probably do that if I wanted to make a binary for Windows, which I've experimented with. So I wanted you know, easy deployment, easy install, all of that. Haskell's been relatively good for that, and probably a lot of other things too. I'm forgetting.
Where does the code line count go to? Like, is it all parsing? Is it all through the counting path?
That's a good question. Do I have that ready to go? Let's see. No, not that one. Oh, come back. Oops. Make CLOC. It's going to tell me by category. Let's see. No, it's not. It's just by language. Bummer. But yeah, this might do. Let's try that. Basically, there's a chunk of it in the lib, a smaller amount in the CLI. Well, maybe it's better actually to just take a quick look here. This will be quicker, I think. So Hledger lib is probably it's got certainly the most modules. These individual modules, some of them are big-ish. This is maybe a little too big. So this is the account type is 200 lines, for example. Account name is 200 lines again. Probably the biggest things are like the journal parser, which is more like 700 lines, so a bit big-ish as far as Haskell goes, but most of these things are small. A lot of them are just importing other stuff.
I got a question for you about tests. What do you find yourself testing? Like what type of stuff? If any, or are you lean heavily on types to sort of not allow regressions to happen?
I definitely need tests as well. So I started writing unit tests using HUnit as inline in the source. I found that really a pain to work with, and I was resisting doing it. So I use these days more functional tests because it's a command line tool. At least the core of it is. I test the command line output for a given input. And actually, there's a tool I wrote again, someone inspired by the Hledger project, which had a little script for giving an input file to the tool and then checking the output against an expected output. So I have a tool for that, which is now separate from Hledger, which is shell test runner, which is what I use for testing Hledger, and it you can find out more about it.
So you just have like a collection of in and out fixtures that
Yeah.
are checked for every.
Yeah, and that I'm using more than the unit test because it's closer to what I'm seeing as a user. If I see a bug, I can quickly make one of these tests, and it runs quick enough. So that's been actually good. Let's go back to Emacs. I seem to be more at home here. So those are in tests, and they're kind of categorized. So if I wanted to test something in the journal format, it's in here. So if I wanted to test comments, so there is a couple of tests in here. This is the command it's supposed to run. This is the input it's going to get. This is what the output should be. This is what the exit status should be. And you can run that with make test, which does this stuff. What does it do? Stack exec. Well, basically it's shell test, and then the file of tests that you want to run. And then there's some other. Cool, worked. Except for one failed because I'm probably running the wrong version of Hledger or something. So yeah, that's kind of what I do for most tests. I'm also using doc test more recently, which is again unit tests in the source, but this time just defined as if you're in an interactive GHCI session. So in a comment. So like doc test in Python and probably other things too. So where do I have that? I could do a quick find here. Here. So here's one. Looks like that. So this is just a haddock or a regular comment before a function, and I have this prompt which indicates this is a test. It's going to run this, and then it's going to expect this output. Or you can have a wildcard, like that kind of thing. And this I'm liking. I'm planning to do much more of this because it's close to what I'm doing when I'm testing in GHCI. Then I can just paste it in here when I have a unit test, which is good. Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, one of the challenges I've had moving to Haskell is like I started with functional test and there's some I don't get the expected result, and it's because of some expression being wrong to the code, and it's very deeply nested, right? So then it becomes a really difficult thing to debug.
Yes.
So then I end up writing some unit tests, but still debugging is a challenge for me right now in Haskell.
Yes. Yes.
So how do you forward? Like I do the tracing, but tracing is like so painful, right? Because
yes.
Then you create a dummy variable.
I hear you, man. I feel you. Yeah, I know.
So that's my biggest nemesis in the past 2 months.
Me too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a normal thing.
There's a lot of angles you can come at it from.
Okay.
Seems to be a lot of things that can help a bit. and I've tried everything that I had time to try. So I do use tracing a lot. So I've kind of put together some utilities to make that easier, which are in debug, might be of interest to you, in Hledger lib package. So this has some things like, these are actually now built into debug.trace, but back when I started they weren't. You can just stick in an strace for any showable thing, and it's a quick way to, like without having to make a lot of change, you can get some output. There's also ptrace. This is good in parsers. It'll show you not just the value that you want to show, but also your parse position in the file and what it's just parsed and what's coming ahead, which I find debugging parsers to be the hardest, actually, partly because I'm not a parser expert. But these here are little tools which will, well, they do two things. They will show output only if the debug level is above a certain level, and that is actually set by the debug command line flag. So if I'm having some trouble, this for example, stats. So say I don't understand that, I can add debug. That didn't give me anything, maybe I need to set it higher, debug 2. So now I'm getting some debug output. And I'm using, so these I can just leave in the code, because if I don't have that flag, then they do nothing. Which is, some of this maybe, I think a lot of Haskellers kind of frown on debugging a little bit. But if you're building something, practical, and it definitely has its place. And debug output has its place, and especially the kind that you're going to use again, so you want to leave it in the code. This is good for that. And it's nice to be able to, also for support, if a user is having trouble, that you can tell them, hey, just run this, because it's built into what they have. And this is using, if you just dump a Haskell value to, it's going to give you the default show instance, which can be pretty hard to read. This you can see is a little bit pretty printed, and that's using a great little library called pretty-show, which if you keep your show instances kind of standard, it will reformat them like this. And I find, because having debugged a lot of bugs, despite Haskell's great type system and all, you do hit a lot of bugs. At least I do. Maybe if I were better, I would hit fewer. But you do find yourself staring at a lot of weird output, and it's anything to give you a little edge is worth it. So over time, I've invested more in that. Played around a little bit with the interactive debugger in GHCI. Have you tried that?
No, I don't play.
Yeah. So that's there too, and I think there's times. This for me is often quicker, but there's probably times where the interactive debugger is the way to go. And I'm sure one of these days it'll get hooked up to IntelliJ and Atom and everything, and it'll become, we'll look back on these days and we'll laugh and we'll say, oh, we were wasting our time back then, now we can just, Anybody else got tips about debugging? And
I generally just rely on a fly check. I guess I've gotten kind of used to reading the types, and so like when you get the 700 lines of types not matching them, but you can kind of go through and be like, okay, well this is this one, and you just kind of follow the types.
Yeah, my types match, but the values don't match.
yeah.
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
it's
so
a
yeah.
different problem.
I mean, types, the Emacs, like, Haskell mode is really not much.
I find in certain, depending what you're building, right?
Yeah.
So,
You're going to have the types maybe enough, but then certain things, types may be totally fine.
like numerical systems, like you don't really
Yeah.
build dependent types, right?
Yeah, and especially if the thing you're building, the specification is not real clear, which was the case with this. By building this, things have gotten a lot clearer for me, but I've had to go back and forth a lot with the original implementation. And the simple little file format, there's a lot of things that intermesh. It gets really complicated. So debugging has been kind of important.
I use debug.trace a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
By chance,
Just
do
for,
you-
just for a sort of scale, like how much time do your builds take and your tests and things like that?
Good question. So this is a MacBook Air from, I guess, about 3 years ago. If I do you saw earlier, were you here for the GHC ID? That's pretty quick.
Yeah.
When it's just reloading like a single change. If I did a full rebuild here, if I can just remember how to open that. Let's get another of these. Let's do a stack clean. So that's going to clean all the packages. If I just want to build, let's time that. No, build. This should be a few seconds, less than a minute anyway. This is building 2 packages, the lib and the Hledger. Typically I won't build like the UI, the web, and the API if I'm debugging the library, you know. So it's relatively quick. It's quicker than building the C++ version was, I can tell you that. That's got some big libraries, the Boost library, and I'm no expert in that stuff, but it was always really nail-biting for me to build that, and it took a long time. This I find builds quicker, given that I have all the dependencies kind of already built. So if you're building all of those too, it takes longer. That's when it's more like a 15, 20 minute thing. So if you're like, I've never built any Haskell thing, and you want to build from source, you're going to have to build maybe 100 libraries that Hledger depends on. And it's routine, it just works generally, but that takes maybe 15 minutes on a machine like this. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
What else were you?
Just how fast tests run.
Tests, right. So this is building, it's not giving a lot of output for some reason, but maybe that's a minute, and maybe I was a little over optimistic on that. Tests, let's stop that. Let's run, this should run, okay, this has to rebuild, and then it'll do unit tests. But those would take, okay, now we see some action. The unit tests, I have, I don't know what, maybe 50 unit tests built in, not very many. They run in a second or two. The functional tests, which are, we're actually calling the command line tool over and over, those are still pretty quick. So if I do make func test, I think it's still going to want to rebuild, isn't it? I shouldn't have done that stack clean because I'm functional tests will run, and I have more of those. I don't know, maybe 100 times it'll call the command. Runs in a few seconds also. Hledger itself, performance to run, where do I have some of that? On this pull request here, where we are just converting from parsec to megaparsec, newer parsing library. We've been doing a little performance testing, so let's see. This is so my typical year's worth of data. So typically I have a file of 1 year at a time. That's typically maybe a couple of thousand transactions. So that's what I see day to day. That typically, it'll run any command on that in 2 or 3 seconds, which is normally fast enough. I don't worry about it. I'd like it to be instant, and there's a lot of room still for optimization here, but that just costs time and person power, so that's work in progress. This is a 100,000 transaction with 1,000 accounts and 10 deep. That one takes about 20 seconds, so that's a little slower. So that just gives you a ballpark. Hledger, the C++ version, is still the speed king with large files. So small files are about the same. Hledger scales better than we do currently, and I would love to fix that. So all help welcome on that. One of our big, I think part of the reason we're slow is that we're totally allocating way too much memory. Here's, I think this is for the 10,000 transaction file, we allocated almost 3 gigabytes. Maximum residency was only 34 megabytes, but still, you know, it's normal for Haskell programs, GHC programs, to allocate a lot and deallocate it very fast. So it's normal for that number to be large. But what we have found, there is a bug open that somebody on Windows was running reports on like 1 million transaction files and hitting the, what is it, the 4 gigabyte memory limit on Windows if you have a 32-bit build. So we had to figure that out and then recommend that he use the 64-bit build, which handles it fine if he has the RAM for it, but it takes, he said it was taking a couple of gigs of RAM and running for a long time. So we should be much more efficient than that. And it's, I think part of it's just maybe the parser is inefficient and doing too much backtracking. And that's another issue with Haskell that also is true what they say. It can be hard to debug memory leaks. And it can be hard to avoid causing them from like unexpectedly. If you're making a small change, it can be a little unpredictable. So, you know, I'm like a lot of folks, I'm interested in learning how to do that more repeatably and with less sweat. And some tools are coming that make it better, but I'm still kind of figuring out that stuff.
It does kind of sound like you have a space leak, and some strictness might solve that.
Maybe, yeah. I've experimented some, but I haven't found the solution. Yeah.
I'd have to learn how to use the tools, but I know at work his handle's Easy Yang, I believe. He wrote some stuff about how to find them.
Yeah, Neil Mitchell has too. He has a great little recipe for doing that. Yeah.
I want to address if you're using types that have a lot of different values, you might benefit from using quick check or small check, which they allow you to basically make assertions about your code, and it'll throw arbitrary data at it and tell you if it fails or not.
Yeah, I looked at it as well. So
Yeah.
the project I'm trying to replicate is like my work project. It's like it's a calculator which rebalances portfolios. So it's like it's a complex set of rules. It's like rules are like thought about like topic. It's like very specific contrived rules which I need to follow to rebalance funds. So the thing is, what I did was, okay, the approach to borrow, I'm using Haskell, so everything's going to be an expression, right? So I have these expressions which are nested all the way down.
Right.
So I started with passing this big object which say, let's say, holds the list of all the funds.
Right. And what's your problem, that it's very tedious to build up those values so you can test them?
Debugging, right? Like, so I built this expression, this looks good, and
Yeah.
because every time a value is needed, it runs through the whole thing. I'm not storing values in between and then passing it down the nodes. So that was the first challenge. And also this was my first Haskell project, so maybe it was too ambitious. But I've been able to replicate 80% of mine.
Nice.
Like 6 months worth of Python code in Haskell.
Nice.
So I think I have the benefit of the test which I have in Python. I have the benefit of the logic in Python, so I can go back and
There's a lot to be said for porting when you're learning Haskell.
Yeah, so that's
so
recently I learned to use the state monad, so I was able to pass the objects as state monad to all the experience. But before that, I was struggling to debug things because these are very complex set of rules, which it's very specific, like case by case basis, and so it's writing quick check is like kind of mind-boggling. So I have a specific test, and I already have that set of tests which I generate, so I was able to use those tests. So yeah, I did look at quick check as well because I thought it was good.
I've heard it's really good, and the real world Haskell book has a thing on it.
Yeah, the thing is, like, for example, right, like for me to generate a quick check, then portfolio, if it's a portfolio, right, I need to generate set of weights for all the funds, and all the weights I have to add up to one. That's first condition, right? So then I need to like equally distribute some funds and make them underweight and make them overweight. So I'll end up writing complicated quick check code, which will become difficult to debug. But yeah, that's a good process. Yeah, I have that in mind, so that will be my next learning exercise.
So I should probably wrap up a little here. Just to mention, there's a tutorial that's like really, really kind of goes through in small steps, some basic accounting, which might be interesting for some folks trying to just get started on a practical level. And then the contributor's guide is right here if anybody should feel inspired. Always looking for help. I'm very interested in not just building, not just coding, but how to make a project that works well, how to make a project that runs well, that is sustainable, that is attractive to work on. And so I'm interested in docs and processes and workflows and all that. So any ideas or help with that is welcome. This is just a page of, some of these links are fun. If you want to explore the commit history, I like this. You may have seen this. That. Sound is not working, bummer. And then there's...
I had to turn down for that the static area.
Oh, there we go. There we go. This was a bit tricky. There's that, and I think somebody also made a fun, you know those YouTube videos that show the activity, the commits over time? I think we have one of those in here somewhere too, which is fun to watch actually, even though it's just a segment of the history. It's pretty interesting. This is to help packagers. I want it to be packaged. And then these are just little recipes for doing various developer things. And you can find, you know, if you want to find out more about the other ones and the inspiration for this, you can look at the Hledger site, and those are all linked as well. So anything I missed out? Anything? Any other questions, or is that a good intro? All right, thanks for listening.
Thanks very much.
Deal with it after the video. So, any questions so far? Cool. So, a little bit about me. I guess I was in need of a time tracking program in 2007. I think I was using Quicken for accounting. I was okay with that, but I was at a new consulting gig where I really needed to track time, and I came across Hledger, used it for about a year, and found it good for that. And then around about the same time I was learning Haskell. This seemed to me to be a good fit. There's kind of a whole backstory there which is described on the site. You can look in the FAQ, which talks about a little bit about the history in there. But the short story is that for a number of reasons, I wanted to see if this app could be written well in Haskell. And it was a great kind of a learning opportunity for me too, because Hledger already had a great design, and I knew I could kind of stick to that, at least in the beginning, and just focus on how do I make this in Haskell. And that worked pretty well. And I've done a few other things now, but this is still my kind of biggest Haskell project so far. It's about 10,000 lines of code, I think, between the CLI. So it starts out as a
10,000 lines of Haskell.
Yeah. I'll double check that in a little bit. So you know, when I started, I thought, well, command line accounting reports, that's going to be really simple, right? It's actually a little trickier than it seemed at first. The original author of Hledger is a very creative guy and has thrown in a lot of features there and a lot of power. But the essence is simple. You have, like it says here, you make a little file. Let's have a look here, actually. Okay, so hey everybody. Simon, Hledger Talk. Who knows what Hledger is? Awesome. Okay. So there is an accounting tool called Hledger. which is written in C++. It's like a command line double entry accounting tool. Hledger is my Haskell port of that. Started in 2007 and been kind of chipping away at it pretty steadily since then, and have had a good number of contributors. They're usually kind of brief, but some significant contributions. Project is at hledger.org, which is not there, is here. And so this kind of gives a little intro. My goal for this talk, and this could go well. If this goes well, we're going to have a very smooth progression from total intro, how to install this thing, and then a few of the things you can do with it, a little bit of a little demo, and then on to how we might make a change to it if we wanted to do some coding, a little bit how a Haskell project looks like, and we'll see how we go with that. And what Craig said was great. Anything that's unclear or confusing at any point, just stop me. I'm in the interest of time, so I don't just talk and talk. I'm going to try and do stuff and show stuff, not just talk. So if you see me just talking and nothing's happening up here, stop me, wave. And if you like and you're able, please do follow along, install code. If you run into trouble doing that, stop me, tell me about it. If we can solve it quickly, that can be useful for other people who may run into similar issues, and it's certainly useful for me. If it's going to be a longer thing, we'll maybe. So you make a text file and you put in it entries. So this is like a general journal in accounting, and every entry represents a transaction. And this is a lot of this. Keep in your mind, this is programmer's view of accounting. So anything I say about accounting may be a little bit naive, but it's good enough to get a lot of useful day-to-day stuff done. So a lot of us in the Ledger and Hledger community, we're kind of amateur accountants, but we love kind of applying the power of scripting and text and programming to doing your finances, whether they be simple or a little bit more intricate. So every transaction here is basically a movement of money. Everyone has a date, an optional description, and then usually 2, sometimes more, postings to accounts. So each of these names an account. The accounts names may have a couple of parts, like you see here, which creates a hierarchy. So assets is at the top. Yeah.
What is accounting?
Okay, good question.
I sort of know what it is, but I don't really know what it is.
So my answer to that is accounting is it's a system for tracking movements of value, usually money, but could be other things like maybe stocks, could be maybe time, but let's stick with money.
Okay.
And there's a particular system invented in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, I forget, in Europe by an Italian. Kind of came out of the trading culture, the merchants of Venice, and possibly even from India. Somebody here probably knows a lot more about this, but
It was Luca Pacioli.
Luca Pacioli invented a system which we now call double entry accounting, and that's been really the most hugely successful kind of system because it's lasted very much with the same concepts to this day, and it's what businesses around the world use to do accounting. And I guess one of the reasons that it's stuck around is it has this concept of double entry, so there's redundancy built into it, so that it's very good at preventing certain kinds of errors. And so that is built into things like Quicken and QuickBooks, although things like Quicken may hide that a little bit from the user to make it simpler.
When you say double entries, you don't mean that you just write the same thing like in the same place twice?
In the original paper accounting systems, you would write it in 2 places. So you would have a journal for one account, which is a sheet in a book, perhaps, and you'd make an entry there, a debit they'd call it, or a credit, and then you'd make an equal entry on another page representing another account. So you want to give a little, did I get that right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you weren't writing literally the same like exact line twice. You're writing a representation of the same information, but from two different perspectives.
Right.
In different places.
Right. So same number, but it's I guess part of the appeal of this system for a lot of us is that it makes that double entry accounting concept kind of simple for a programmer. In a little bit, this is a little bit of an oversimplification. It loses a little bit of the error checking of true double entry accounting, but basically every transaction is a movement of money from some account to some other account. And normally, if I write it out in full, this will be equal and opposite. So these amounts must always sum to zero to have a balanced transaction. And basically, it's saying money is not created out of thin air. It doesn't vanish. It's got to move from somewhere to somewhere else. And rather than having the two ledgers, the two pages that have to be, you have to page through, and they used to have scribes to do this. We have it written out in one file, closer together, but still the concept is that there's a movement from and a movement to, and you've got to have two accounts. If I write just that, for example, which when you start out kind of makes sense, so I got some money, but the program will reject that because that way lies madness. If we don't record, keep things kind of balanced, we're kind of missing an opportunity for error checking. So this may become a little clearer as we look at some more examples. Did I answer what's accounting? Pretty much, yeah. Okay.
The one thing that I was going to say that I learned is that Pacioli was a colleague of Leonardo da Vinci.
Right.
Which is, that was something, when I first heard about that, I thought, wow, this guy is really sharp.
Yeah, he was well connected. And there's there's probably a bunch of great books, but there's one on this that I can show you later on a Twitter feed that I really liked. So the idea is that we take something like this, and quick little demo. We can, Hledger will parse that text format into, here's the same thing, but now it's parsed so it understands that these are transactions. We could look at maybe just the register for the checking account right there, and we'd see just the entries to the bank account, or maybe to all assets. So here's where the hierarchy comes in. So now we're getting checking and also saving and also cash. So these top level categories are pretty important. Accounts, they're also, think of them as categories. They're a way to kind of categorize movements of money. In some programs like Quicken, they actually call them categories. But in true double entry accounting, you don't have categories separate.